everyone. And
Linda, I'm having problems with the video, so I'll just listen. This is Olivia.
oh, Olivia, all right. I have a pot for you too, Olivia. So thank you.
Okay.
Um, Today we're going to have our gardener, Adrienne Williams, who's with Growing and Growth Collection. And we want to thank her for making her presentation to us today. And she's going to talk about the Black farmers' history, connecting arts with planting, and also helping us decorate our pot. We want to thank Faith, Friends of Art for Community Enrichment. They donated the pots, the markers, the soil, and the seeds for today's First Tuesday tea. And also, we want to thank Isabel Ridgway, who sponsors our First Tuesday tea. Um, there will be no tea in July or August. We are making plans. As you can see, I'm back in the office and we're hoping September will be our first on-site First Tuesday tea. So we're excited and we hope that everyone has a great summer. At this time, I'm going to ask everyone to mute their mics, and then Adrienne will give us some directions on how to paint and plant. So thank you so much, Adrienne, and welcome.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first, thank you for that warm welcome. So yes, I am Adrienne Williams, and I am here on behalf of the Growing and Growth. And our focus is getting more Black, Indigenous people of color involved in urban agriculture. And so we've worked in the past with the complex. We're actually developing a garden space that you guys will soon see unveiled around Juneteenth. So we're super excited about that. And as Linda said earlier, we really try to promote art and agriculture together because there are a lot of overlaps there. And so a part of today, because I'm going to talk about the history of Black farming in the United States, but I wanted to, outside of using this as an educational piece, bring in the art. And so all of you should have these terracotta pots that that were provided to you. And I'm just showing you kind of what I did just as some inspiration maybe. And so the markers that you have, and Linda, I don't know if you want to show yours as well. She has a beautiful pot with her markers, the acrylic markers. So you can just paint whatever you want. She did some beautiful flowers. I have some leaves and some words. I also like using mixed media art. So one of the things that we talked about is if you have like a junk folder or a junk drawer, if you have like loose buttons, loose materials, you can, glue those onto your pot too. So while I'm talking, going through the slides, feel free to stop me with questions, but also feel free to continue to work on your pots. So does everyone have their pots already with them? I know some folks are shaking their heads. So great. I'll just jump right in. Are there any questions before we hop right in? Everybody all good? Some thumbs up. I see some people looking down, so it looks like they're working on their pots. And then at the end, we can share them if you want. No pressure, but you can share them at the end. So we'll go to the next slide here. Okay, so for today's discussion, so as we think about Juneteenth, it's a few weeks away from now. I wanted to use this time to kind of talk about our past, present, and future in agriculture as Black people. There's a very rich culture there, but of course it's very nuanced in a lot of ways. And so I wanted to use this time as an open forum to kind of talk about that, but then to also find out from you guys if you have a history with gardening, if you remember growing up growing and just kind of going through that. And so we'll talk about, you know, the history of Black agriculture in the US. We'll also talk about, kind of to break it up a little bit so we walk away with some additional knowledge, basics of plant care. So I have my plant here. I'll also talk about container gardening because you guys got seeds. And then the future of farming and Q&A. So before we hop in, if anyone feels like sharing, are there any folks who have a history in farming and growing in any type of way? Feel free to just unmute yourself and you can hop right in.
I do.
Who's that? Sorry, I just saw.
Olivia.
Olivia, okay, do you mind sharing?
Well, I grew up on a farm. So we still have my parents' property. We still have fruit trees, but we had vegetables. We had corn and greens and tomatoes and okra. So
Nice.
here where I live, I have greens, herbs, peppers, tomatoes.
Oh, wow. That sounds really good. And this is on your property in your backyard?
Right, exactly. And I also put the peppers on, because I live on a corner, I put peppers in the midst of my annuals, and they just look beautiful in there.
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah, I can picture that because the actual pepper plant, I mean, obviously the flowering, the plant part, the pepper part is pretty, but even the leaves are just like a very rich green. So I can imagine they look beautiful with your annuals. And where's your family's farm? Is it in Ohio or?
No, it's in Mississippi.
In Mississippi? Okay, nice. Awesome.
And I also have sage in the midst of my perennials and annuals. And I never knew until this year that sage actually blooms. It has really beautiful lilac flowers on it.
Yeah. Sage is beautiful and it smells divine. So yes. Awesome. Anybody else with a growing history or currently growing? Anyone interested in growing? Kind of like iffy. It's a lot of work. I know for a lot of people, it's a lot of work. And it's, you know, it definitely can take up a lot of your time, but it can be rewarding. So I'd like to start out this discussion with this quote. And so there's a book by Leah Penniman called Farming While Black. And the quote that she's, you know, kind of starts off this book with, our people have been traumatized and disoriented. While the land was the scene of the crime, she was never the criminal. And so this quote, it really ties into like that history as we think about with Black people in particular in the land. There is that really painful and nuanced history as we think about working the land. And for some folks, I don't know if any of you have Netflix, but there's a new documentary that just came out that I would implore everyone to watch called High on the Hog, where essentially they look at our cuisine roots throughout the diaspora, from West Africa to the South to wherever we are today. But a big part of that is obviously that agricultural tie. And, you know, coming over as enslaved Africans and what that meant with our engagement with the land. But even before that time, there was a deep and rich agricultural history as West Africans. And I would say that that documentary really sums that up in a very amazing way. In fact, Olivia, I kind of smiled because okra was not a plant that was indigenous to the United States, but is a part of West African cuisine. And they even talked about, you know, when we grow up, we always say, oh, we're having candied yams for Thanksgiving. Well, chances are you're not having yams. Like the actual yam is huge. It looks different, but the closest thing to a yam, because it is the United States, is our sweet potatoes, right? And so you're having candied sweet potatoes. Even growing up, my mom always said, I'm making candied yams. And so you just have that connection to Western Africa through agriculture. And we just kind of have to always think about that as we think about being stewards of the land. So, so for the creative exercise, you can go ahead and design. This is one of the things that I do for any of the folks who are kind of struggling with what you could potentially do on your pot. I would say create a word palette. And the way in which I do this is, as you think of the words nurturing, land, and nature, think of the 5 words that come to mind. And you write those down. And then the trick of this is that those are 5 words you can't use. So you actually really think outside the box as you are creating your pots. So, but again, we can just go ahead and you can flow with it and just design it how you want to. But if you're kind of stuck, that is kind of a, brain exercise to get you to think a little bit differently. So who's all familiar with the term 40 acres and the mule? And we'll probably be hearing this a lot more as we're getting close to Juneteenth. Probably most folks on this call are familiar. I see some hands. So one of the things that was always interesting to me, a little bit about my background. So in undergrad, one of my majors was actually African-American studies. And so, I heard this term quite a bit. But I think that a lot of folks don't realize that it was actually like a codified piece of, like a codified order, right? It's not just a saying. And so the way in which that came to be was just really quickly, like, during the Civil War, Black formerly enslaved individuals took that opportunity as, the troops are just kind of marching throughout the South. They took that as an opportunity to potentially garner freedom. And so what they ended up doing was following behind Union General Sherman's army, his troops. And so as they were attempting to flee, the troops built just kind of like a temporary bridge to cross a rather dangerous creek. Well, as the Confederate Army is kind of falling behind and closely behind them, the troops destroyed the bridge so that, the Confederate Army could not cross. But by extension of that, many of the Black formerly enslaved individuals ended up drowning. It was just a very, as you can imagine, a rather horrific scene. And so upon learning this, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and General Sherman met with some Black leaders. A lot of them were clergymen, to understand how they could, what type of reparations would be helpful. And these clergymen were very insightful to say, land is important. You know what I mean? The quickest way to acquire wealth in this country what has been and continues to be the acquisition of land. And so based on that, the term, 40 acres and the mule actually happened. That was a promise that was given to individuals, but unfortunately with the assassination of Lincoln, his successor revoked these orders. And as we know, reparations for formerly enslaved individuals did not come to be. So, as you think about agriculture, the acquisition of land, the ability to pass on wealth, revoking of that land, was very impactful to us as Black people and continues to be a source of discussion. And so, a lot of times when I share this slide, a lot of folks are like, oh, I had no idea that was like, they know the term, they know Spike Lee named his production company that, but that it was actually a genuine order is a surprise to some folks. Are any folks surprised upon learning this, or were you kind of aware it was actually, written into like that it was an actual order that was codified at one point? I'm getting Karen shaking her head. She's aware.
Yes.
Yep. So quite a few folks were. So that's good to know. For a lot of folks, they're like, wait, I had no idea that it was actually given and and then essentially revoked. So even despite that, even with the revoking of land and a lot of impediments being put into place, Black farmers were actually able to thrive. In fact, in the 1920s, Black farmer representation peaked with 14% of farmers being Black at the time, which is pretty on par with the population. And that was worth millions of dollars or millions of acres. However, over time, we've seen that number decline significantly. And that's why, I am interested in the work that I do, because I would like to see more of us in those growing and agricultural spaces, because there are real dollars and real impacts to that decline in the Black farmer and agriculture. So, in the peak of 1920s, Black people represented 14% of all farmers. Today, it currently sits around a little less than 2%. And what does that mean? So researchers out of Texas A&M University evaluated this land loss to be to the tune of $350 billion. So when we talk about the loss of, of Black farmers, it's not just like, oh, people aren't growing. Like, that has actual tangible impact to wealth acquisition, to playing an important part in food systems, all those things that are very relevant and very topical right now. Are there any questions about this slide?
Yes, this is Mary Remsen. I have a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
That the 14% of farmers, my concern is that those were probably sharecroppers that did not really own the land, that really we were, in fact, I would say sharecropper slaves. I don't see where I don't see how we would now think that going back. I know a lot of people are thinking about going back to farming and that it is successful, but my thoughts is if it's difficult for Caucasians, it would be horrendous for people of color.
Yep. Nope, that's a very good point. So 2 points. So definitely agree around the 14% of farmers. So some of those folks were sharecroppers, some of them tenant farmers. So absolutely, not all of them necessarily own their land. And that's where the Texas A&M quote comes from. So that's looking at that 350 billion are for the folks who actually owned the land. And to your point, farming is not the easiest job. You know what I mean? Like, farmers can historically have very slim margins, but definitely, playing a part in the food system, being able to acquire said land and, grow food and sell that food, that's definitely something that we should consider. Is it for everyone? Absolutely not. But I definitely think that, it's worth looking into, especially as we get further into the slides. The US government is trying to address that disenfranchisement in very material ways. Are there any other questions? I think you said you had another one, Mary, or was that the?
Yeah, that's all.
Oh, okay, perfect.
I had put in the chat, Adrienne, about the unfair banking processes that took their toll, even close to today. I had seen a program. I was listening to a radio program, and not giving loans and to them, and also then evaluating their property differently. Yes. A guy even had to give up his pet dogs because they considered them working farm dogs. So yeah, that kind of thing.
You teed up my slide quite perfectly. So yeah, you're absolutely right. This is marrying what you said, Karen, to what Mary was saying. So absolutely, with a lot of different industries, Black people have been significantly disenfranchised. And because of this, we're seeing, and I'm just kind of giving a under the hood early. As we know, Senators Warnock, a part of the COVID stimulus package that was just passed just recently, Senators Booker and Warnock basically created some legislation in there to address disenfranchisement of farmers of color. And this is some of the reason why, right? So as we talked about 1920s, Black farmers tended to peak, but I'm not going to go through every point here, but essentially we see that disenfranchisement of Black farmers played a very integral part in that decline. So as Karen was saying, to give you kind of a really high level way in which this would happen. So the USDA gives money that can be in their crop loans, right? So at the beginning of the season, you get a crop loan so you can grow, because you don't really make money until your harvest. So you have to get loan money to plant for that upcoming year. Well, the USDA gives that money. However, it's at the local level in which it's dispersed. And a lot of those people at the local level are farmers or in the agricultural community in general. And they tend not to be, right? It's, and so a lot of times Black farmers would go and try to get their crop loan, and they would either be flat out denied, or the crop loan would come in late, or it would come in a lot less. So those were the three ways in which it would really impact Black farmers. And if you're not getting if you're flat out denied, like, you're probably not growing, right? Because you don't have the money to grow. If you're getting it late, we're on Mother Nature's time. We don't tell Mother Nature what to do. She tells us what to do. So if we're getting our money late, we're sowing late, everything is pushed off, not able to get the harvest you typically would. And then if you get less, then you're again not able to produce as much as you normally would. So this would greatly impact a lot of Black farmers. And because of this, to your point, Karen, a lot of folks had to get out of farming. They had land, and to Mary's point, yes, there were Black sharecroppers, and yes, there were Black tenant farmers, but there were also farmers who actually owned land, and I mean, I still have friends who have farmland in the South to this day. So we did own land, but a lot of times we had to give it up because we weren't given the resources to be successful, or even more egregious, some folks were pushed off of their land, right? And so there was just a lot of different ways in which farmers were impacted. And kind of shifting forward a little bit. So in 1983, all of us on this phone, were alive in 1983. One further example is, as we think about all of these civil rights issues that are happening at this time, the Reagan administration decides to dismantle the Office of Civil Rights at the USDA, right? And it's like all of these things are happening in the very time when you need to have this office addressing it. Office, because you're saying, oh, we don't see any disenfranchisement, we don't see any of these egregious practices. So just kind of seeing how things can work in the background and the forefront to have it where almost $350 billion worth of land is lost over time. And again, I'm not bleeding this slide too much, but just showing how over time is going on, we're continuing to see these issues around, USDA loans, seeing that there's underrepresentation of minority farmers on rural USDA committees. So again, those USDA committees, that's your bread and butter as a farmer. Those are the people who are saying who gets a loan, when they get a loan, and other resources to help them be successful farmers.
Yes.
You can see how underrepresentation, I'm going to look out, that person's like, I'm going to look out for my friend. And that friend, what I mean, before they would look out for this farmer over here, you can see how it just all works against each other and works against a lot of the Black farmers.
Yeah. Yep.
Was there somebody who, oh, sorry. I went backwards. So that all leads up to Pickford versus Goodman. Are any of you guys familiar with this court case or have heard of Pickford versus Glickman at all? Okay, so just really quickly, so Pickford versus Glickman is really interesting for a lot of reasons, but what's super interesting about it is that it's this huge case that a lot of folks haven't heard of. So essentially, because the USDA saw and it was proven that there was a lot of discriminatory practices that occurred, they had to make they had to make it right. Like they had to do something. And so what essentially happened is in 1999, the USDA reached a $1.03 billion settlement in this landmark case. It remains the largest federal civil rights settlement in the US history. So of all of the federal civil rights settlements of the US history, this remains the largest. $1.03 billion sounds like a lot, but when the settlement, was all said and done, that ended up being about $50,000 per farmer. And they also got forgiven loans. Now, for some farms, it can cost millions of dollars for them to operate. So $50,000 is literally like a drop in the bucket. So, we see that big number there and we're like, yeah, that's like some progress, but there's still more to be done. And that is why we see what is happening or what has happened with what Senator Warnock and Senator Booker put into the federal stimulus package for the pandemic. So I know that a lot of what I focused on was just like the very nuanced and honestly the very complicated history of Black farmers. But one of the things that I want us to remember and to take away from this, if nothing else, is that Black farmers were innovators, that we have a deep agricultural history that we can tie back to West Africa. Again, I will put it in the chat, but High on the Hog, I would beg all of you to watch it because, again, just so many of our cooking traditions, some of the vegetables that we love to eat, the ways in which we grow, we can tie that back to, Nigeria, Benin, Ghana, like all these West African countries that we originated from. So in terms of Black farmers being innovators, regenerative farming, has anyone heard of regenerative farming on this call? It's like a new, people are talking about it everywhere now. Everyone's trying to do regenerative farming. But essentially regenerative farming is what it sounds like. So it's basically trying to make something better than what it was, like regenerate, to add more life to it. So we all know George Washington Carver. We know him for all of the different ways in which he created products out of peanuts and contributed science via agriculture. But one of the things that people don't talk about a lot with him is his research in crop rotation. In fact, his research in crop rotation led to improving topsoil that had degraded in southern states because of one crop farming in the antebellum South. So the one thing about when you, and this is even in your gardens, right? So you want to rotate your crops in your gardens, because if every single year for years and years, you're planting tomatoes in that one spot, or in the case of what we're talking about here, they were planting tobacco or cotton, or even, in the Carolinas, maybe rice, like continuously doing this one crop, those crops are taking up the same nutrients year over year over year. And it's like degrading of the topsoil. And as a farmer, as a grower, your topsoil is your bread and butter. Nothing can thrive without the soil being where it needs to be. But through his research, he showed that switching out different crops, and as growers, we call them cover crops. So at the end of a season, we'll put grow certain things there to kind of put nutrients back into the soil and to recorrect the soil. We have George Washington Carver to thank for that, right? And so I want people to think about that. Like, as Black agrarians, we created so many things that we benefit from today. Another example is community supported agriculture programs. So Booker T. Whatley, he started the Clientele Membership Club, which is a precursor to CSAs. And what's powerful about this is because he was a grower and he said, I find that when we have a middleman as Black growers, that middleman can take our crops, tack on a huge margin, and like basically they're making more than we are, they're benefiting more than we are as growers. So he basically set up a system where growers went directly to the consumer. And because of that, they were able to be more planful about how much they grew, who it was sourced to or who it was provided to. But then it also provided consistent cash flow. So that meant employment and empowerment for a lot of individuals who would have normally been disenfranchised. And then finally, one of my personal sheroes, Fannie Lou Hamer. We know a lot about her because of voting rights and what she did in the South, but she also was developed one of the first farming cooperatives with the Freedom Farm Cooperative. And she addressed racism and food access for Black Southerners. And the reason why she did that was because a lot of Black sharecroppers or tenant farmers, when they're the people who own the land, when some of the white landowners found out that they were trying to vote, they told them, if you vote, you won't have a job, right? And so she took that as an opportunity to say, we will acquire this land and we will grow on this land and provide for ourselves. And so we have her to thank for farming cooperatives as they are today. So any of this surprising information, some of these names are new, or one name is probably new. Some of the names are probably familiar, but just not knowing them within a farming framework. Any questions? We all good? Perfect. Okay, so kind of shifting gears a bit, as I talked about, innovation being, great growers and agriculture, I want us to think about how we take care of our plants, how we take care of the things that we grow. But before that, I'll leave you with this. Look like the people they live with somehow. And I love that. Another personal shero, Zora Neale Hurston. And so, it's saying my internet is unstable. That's weird. Can you guys still hear me and see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So just really quick for plant care, I just always put this in here because for people, as you're doing your pots, some of this will be relevant for herbs, but some of it's also very relevant for your plants. So I always say, remember WEST. This is just a random acronym I made up, but it stands for water, environment, sun exposure, and temperature. So with water, less is more. So you don't want to overwater your plant. The good thing, hopefully your pots that you have a drainage hole at the bottom, because one thing you don't want is for the water to kind of pool around your roots. When that happens, something called root rot occurs, and it's not fun for you. You don't want that to happen. Environment, you want to be mindful of humidity levels in your home. Some plants, especially if you have tropical plants, they kind of like water. So I will mist my plant. Some plants, if it's small enough, I'll take it into the bathroom with me while I shower, just so that the humidity hits my plants, because they love that and that just makes them super happy. Sun exposure, buy plants that are suitable for the sun that you get in your home. So the least amount of light you'll get is north, the most is south, and east and west are about equal. So wherever your plant is placed, like don't put like a monstera in a north-facing plant or north-facing window, because they like sun and that just won't be enough sun for them. I had to learn the hard way. And then finally, temperature. Your plants like it between 65 and 75. I put this here because I had a plant near one of my air vents, and like in the winter, it was getting direct heat in the winter, and in the summer, in air conditioning, and it just was not a good situation. So just remember those aspects when you're thinking about your plant care. I'll skip repotting. In terms of container gardening must, because we gave you guys soil and seed, the most important thing for your container garden is making sure that you have the appropriate container size and material. So I think all your pots are terracotta. Is that right, Linda? Like they're this terracotta material?
Yes, they're all terracotta.
Yep, so that should be fine. One of the things that you want to, if you ever get any more growing, like grow bags or anything like that, you can buy those online. Those are really good because they're very permeable. So like if you water, it won't overwater because the water will just come out of it because it's an actual fabric. And then you want to make sure, again, you want to get the appropriate size for the mature plant. So I would not put a tomato plant in anything this size because this is just way too small. And tomato plants get humongous. And then soil for your container plant or your container garden. Raised bed soil and topsoil are fine. Raised bed soil is good because they'll have a few more nutrients than just your regular topsoil because they realize like with container plants, they're not getting the benefit of organic material just kind of like decomposing on it all the time. So leaves, bugs, all that stuff are constantly decomposing and adding to that topsoil. That's not happening in a container. So you can sometimes mix in compost or humus if you want to ensure you have that organic material. If not, you can fertilize. So like regular plant food will also help in the container garden situation if you're not able to add like compost or humus. But you definitely want something that is giving your plants those macro and micronutrients that they'll need that they won't get from in-ground gardening because they're not getting that constant organic material being added to it. And then finally, water. So just be, and I'm missing a G here, be vigilant in monitoring watering needs. Just making sure that, you know, you're not overwatering and underwatering, like you'll just want to continue to pay close attention to that. So I know I ran through those pretty quick to keep track of time. Are there any other questions around plant care, container gardening, as you guys continue with your pots?
Adrienne, will you mention the event that's going to be hosted here on the 17th?
I'm sorry?
Will you mention the event that you're hosting here on the 17th?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll put that, I'll drop that information into the chat. Absolutely. And I think Linda, you might be able to send out that information as well. The flyer. Oh, okay, okay, perfect. Awesome. Any other questions before I go through the next few slides? How are your pots coming along? Okay.
So far, so good.
Got some good stuff cooking over there.
Yay.
Oh, look at you, Olivia. I love that.
Oh, Olivia.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, and what's the top of it say? Or it looks like it has words or design.
Yeah, it's just my art.
Oh, I love it.
Just my little circles. I am not an artist, not at all.
We're all artists. We're all art. And Marion, yes, I love it.
Let me see it.
See it.
Oh, yeah.
Went around the brim.
Oh,
I went
love
around
it.
the brim.
Look at Alice.
And then Alice, I see the material.
Where's Alice? Let me see Alice.
Yes, I love it.
I'm sorry, I'm just listening. I didn't decorate mine yet. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're
I'm
fine.
multitasking here. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Oh wow, and look at yours. Oh my gosh, with the butterfly on it.
Ooh.
We love a good pollinator situation. I love it.
All the things way.
Great. Well, I
Come
will,
around this way.
oh, go ahead.
Come here, Cook.
Okay. So the next few slides will just kind of look at the future state and current state of farming, right? And so and I love this book of hers. This is another great quote. When we as Black people are bombarded with messages that our only place of belonging on land is forming dangerous and backbreaking manual labor, to learn of our true and noble history as farmers and ecological stewards. So again, connecting our agricultural roots and history to the here and now.
Some of my blocks.
So for the current landscape, so again, today, Black farms make up 1.7% of the nation's 2 million farms. And again, we're continuing to work towards course correcting some of those federal dollars. And so, you know, even as recently as 2017, when we had a previous administration, we saw that loans to Black farmers dropped. And so because of that, we know that going into this year and subsequent years, that is a focus that will continue to be monitored and that is addressed by this current administration. So
Cool.
where we intend to be, so looking at a future state, the Justice for Black Farmers Act. So this has been kind of in the works for some time now. Senators Booker, Gillibrand, and Warren introduced the Justice for Black Farmers Act. Some of the main goals of the legislation is again to end discrimination in the USDA, protect existing lands that Black farmers own, and to create farm conservation corps for career training. So we're training up the next group of farmers. And as I said before, Senators Warnock and Booker worked on some legislation that addresses discrimination and the presence of farmers of color via the stimulus package that just passed. We also are addressing land dispossession. So again, that Justice for Black Farmers Act will take a holistic approach in addressing this by creating the Equitable Land Access Service within the USDA. It will provide land grants of up to 160 acres to existing and aspiring Black farmers, which is kind of cool because there's a Black farmer that I follow on social media, and he just recently found out that he got some acres through the USDA. So we're seeing it kind of even playing out today with more Black growers being able to benefit through land acquisition. And also what's kind of cool for me, because climate change continues to be something that I always worry about and focus on. The Biden administration is basically killing two birds with one stone by trying to address the decline of Black farmers, but then also climate change by leveraging these farmers as a resource to impact climate change. And this will be achieved through regenerative agricultural practices. So, you know, there's a school of thought about not making it too sciencey, but sequestering carbon through soil. And so making sure that as these new farmers are being trained and getting more into the profession, that they're able to leverage some of those regenerative farming practices, such as like no-till farming, not using certain chemicals, but instead relying on more natural ways of fertilization, such as manure, composting, a lot of those other different things. So a lot of interesting and potentially exciting things for individuals who are interested in becoming growers. Are there any questions about any of the information on this slide?
Adrienne.
Uh-huh.
I have a question. Are there any Black farmers in Ohio?
Yeah, we do have Black farmers in Ohio. So there's definitely some more representation that should happen. It's funny because you, and this is Miss Darla talking. Darla, is that you?
Yes.
I thought that was your voice. So Jara, who's my counterpart through Growing and Growth, she actually knows one of the farmers who is, there's only 2 Black farmers in the Ohio Farmers Hall of Fame, and their father and son, and she knows the son. But we do have, I don't know the exact number of Black farmers that we have, but there's definitely some here. The one good thing that I will say is that Central State University, because it is a land grant university, like Ohio State, they have a presence, like an extension presence. And because of that, like that would be a good resource in terms of Black, like Black farmers and things of that nature. So I don't know the exact number, but we do have a presence. but definitely an opportunity to have more of us in that space. So yeah. But when you think about the fact that agriculture is our #1 industry in Ohio, you can see how there's nothing but upside. So, and hopefully one of these days I'll be a part of the farmers. We'll see.
Oh my.
I would love to get some land and grow on it. Okay.
I can sell you 10 acres.
Who said that? I missed it. Was that you, Olivia?
Yeah, it was.
This is, yeah. So yeah, so just as we think about, so for folks who are like, you know what, I might not be into growing, or, you know, that might not be a focus of mine, just different ways that you can get involved. And so, actually, let me make this smaller. So there are 3 big ways that I think that folks can get involved with growing, agriculture, or supporting urban agriculture. So a lot of us live in cities, right? We don't live far out where we might have 10, 20, 100 acres of land, but we still want to grow. So we have growing spaces here in Columbus through community gardens. We have urban farms that are in Columbus. And a lot of them are very grassroots. So I always tell people, like, you can support through financials. So that's engagement with CSAs. So, you know, some urban farms might grow and you get a box, you know, you pay every week or monthly, whatever the cadence is, and they provide a box of produce, and it's sharing in the wealth, right? And so that's one way you can support. You can support food scrap recycling services. So as we talk about compost, instead of throwing that food out, you know, it's better for the environment, and you can have it turned into compost, and that's supporting a community organization. Or you can donate directly to community farms and food systems organizations. Columbus has a bunch of them. You know, just ask around and they're definitely there. You can support by physically getting your hands in the soil. Community gardens always welcome help. I know I work with 5 community gardens, and we're always, you know, if people want to volunteer on cleanup days or any other days that we have, we always welcome that. And then educational and policy. Most of our cities have some type of food systems, local action plan, some type of food policy plan. It might not be called this, but something similar. Just become, you know, very aware of that, especially as we think about food access. You know, as we talk more and more about, you know, when you think about redlining and all these other things where certain neighborhoods have just declined over time, a lot of those neighborhoods don't have access to fresh or healthy foods. And you just want to be aware and remain an engaged and vigilant citizen, so that, you know, as development is happening in those areas, is there a plan to bring in a grocery store? You know, how are we addressing, you know, the current residents in those neighborhoods? So there are a lot of different ways in which you can stay engaged and involved near you. And so I'll just end the presentation with this quote, another author that I very much love, Alice Walker. And she says, in nature, nothing is perfect and everything is perfect. Trees can be contorted, bent in weird ways, and they're still beautiful. So, you know, kind of ending that with, a lot of things can be very nuanced. Some things can be very painful, but, you know, at the end of it all, there's beauty in our relationship to the land, and just not to ever forget that. And so I'll end the presentation there. Are there any questions? I'll turn it.
So how do we plant these seeds? How deep? Do we just need light soil on top, or how deep in the pot?
Yeah, so depending on what you have, and you can always, I always double check with the seed packet. It will tell you sometimes how deep to go.
Okay.
And so depending on what you have, certain things have different needs. So usually maybe about 1 inch or 2 of soil at the top will be good, but it depends on what you have. So make sure you double check that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, absolutely. Any other questions from the group? Anybody else want to share their pot before we close it out? here?
Well, here's my final
Working
product.
away. Well, I am super.
Mary, where's your pot?
Oh, I see a question in the chat, really, if I can open it. I don't know if it'll let me open the question. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Eva. Awesome. Well, I'm sure Linda will share the information about June 17th, about the unveiling of the garden at the King Arts Complex. We can't wait to see you guys there. And yeah. And then, oh yeah, thank you, Mertice.
Yes, Adrienne, we wanted to thank you, and we're so honored to have you talk to us and be part of the King gardening project. We love it.
Yes.
We can't wait for the 17th.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
thank you. Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day, you guys.
Thanks, you too.
Presentation, Adrienne.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
September.
Thanks, Linda.
You're welcome. Everybody have a great summer. Stay safe, stay well, and hopefully we'll all be together in September.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good to see you, Miss Olivia.
Good to see everyone. Thank you. Is that Darla?
Yes, ma'am.